I am sometimes baffled by the fact that a journalist, along with his crew and their equipment, has such expediency when responding to these disasters, but the state response is non-existent for days. True to form, the corporately controlled media recites the well-rehearsed narratives that have come to be the dominant discourse for spaces like Port-au-Prince and New Orleans. The readiness of an Anderson Cooper is in part the result of the fact that the script for Haiti, like the script for New Orleans, has already been written way in advance of the disaster. Like any actor, the mainstream news journalist is also aware of her or his script. A performance whose sole aim is to mediate for a shocked and removed audience the reality of the narrative that allows us to see both Haiti as well as New Orleans. We see these catastrophes as, quote, natural disasters opposed to man-made. To view these impacted as, we see those impacted as either unfortunate victims of this natural disaster, unless one is referring to Hurricane Katrina, when those who stayed behind are seen as irrational actors. We are also encouraged to assume that the devastation is the consequence of an ill-prepared and an underdeveloped infrastructure, and not to assume that the fragility of this infrastructure is the result of years of neglect, indifference, and repression by the state. Then there is the presentation of whiteness, white supremacy, and US exceptionalism that is woven into the semantics of white rescue workers, white humanitarian workers, Western aid, and a largely white US press corps that covers the tragedy while posing and posturing in the midst of black and brown bodies. In our culture of instantaneous feedback, the ability of the mainstream media to control the dominant discourse is challenged by new media. Unlike the coverage of Hurricane Katrina, Anderson Cooper is not the only narrator of the destruction and devastation in Haiti. Independent journalists, amateur bloggers, and grassroots activists are dispatching stories that frame the realities of on the ground in Haiti with very different intentions. And even with this diversity of perspectives, I cannot escape noticing the parallels between the aftermaths of Haiti and New Orleans. These parallels are persuasively enunciated in an essay by the 2008 Green Party presidential candidate and former Georgia congressional representative Cynthia McKinney. McKinney, and noted in the Associated Press, points out, and I quote, "On day 2 of the tragedy, a C-130 plane with military assessment team landed in Haiti with the stated purpose to determine what military resources are needed," end quote. At the orders of President Obama, I quote, "The first US contribution to the humanitarian relief needed in Haiti were reconnaissance drones whose staffing are more accustomed to looking for hidden weapon sites and surface-to-air missile batteries than wrecked infrastructure," end quote. By the end of the day, we began to see the first signs of the injured being evacuated from the destruction and flown by US military personnel to Guantanamo Bay, as reported by the Washington Post. The first individuals to be evacuated from Haiti were approximately 8 injured Haitians and a group of US embassy staffers, and I quote, "designated as priorities by the US ambassador and his staff," end quote. For some US citizens, even the evacuation of the 8 Haitians out of the destruction caused by the earthquake might be 8 too many. As early as day 3, the US Coast Guard Rear Admiral James Watson IV reassured Americans, and I quote, "Our focus right now is to work with the US Defense Department, the State Department, FEMA, and all agencies of the US federal government to minimize the risk of Haitians who want to flee their country," end quote. Watson went on to say, "We want to provide them with those relief supplies so they can live in Haiti." On Tuesday, July 19th, the New York Times reported that Lieutenant Commander Chris O'Neill of the US Coast Guard was pleased that no Haitian earthquake survivors have attempted to flee Haiti, and that he wanted to make sure that, and I quote, anyone caught leaving the island and heading toward Florida would be returned to Haiti, end quote. By the end of day 4, the U.S. reportedly has evacuated over 800 U.S. nationals. While the Obama administration's response to the earthquake's aftermath, albeit more immediate than that of our former President George W. Bush, is defined by increased militarism, a securing of Haiti's borders to prevent survivors from evacuating, and a targeted evacuation of U.S. nationals, there was the response by nations like Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, who were among the first to send doctors and first responders to Haiti, as well as the nation of Senegal, who has gone on record to offer Haitians the right to relocate to Senegal. For the thousands of Hurricane Katrina survivors who suffered over 6 days in the aftermath of this man-made disaster, their stories regarding how the U.S. government responded to their cries is eerily similar to the narrative that continues to play out in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. The first sign of the U.S. government in post-Katrina New Orleans was in the form of the Coast Guard helicopters that flew military assessments over the city, while thousands of New Orleanians cried out for help and to be rescued. As reported by many survivors of Hurricane Katrina, the first areas to be evacuated were the affluent communities and the mostly white tourists in the fairly unaffected French Quarter. Then came the armed military with their orders from the former governor of Louisiana, shoot to kill. And for the hundreds of good civilians who wanted to enter New Orleans with their boats to rescue the survivors, they were met at quasi-military checkpoints and told that they could not enter for fear of violence. The fortressing of post-Katrina New Orleans even extended to the hundreds of survivors who, after 4 days of being abandoned in the New Orleans Convention Center, attempted to flee the city and cross over the Crescent City Connection, which is a major intrastate connection bridge that connects New Orleans to its west bank, only to be met by an armed band of white militia who were led by the sheriff of the neighboring parish.